Hey there, in this video we're going to look at fractions and decimals and specifically an intro to what they are and how we can determine what is a fraction, what is a decimal, and then eventually we'll get into actually using those, what they mean, all of that. So to start, most of the math questions found on an aptitude test require a basic understanding of working with fractions and decimals. You may be required to perform straightforward calculations involving fractions or decimals, and you may also be required to understand information that's presented that includes fractions or decimals. So we will not teach you in this unit everything there is to know about fractions and decimals, but instead we'll try to create a correlation between the two and help you convert eventually from one format to the other. All right. And that is a helpful technique that can help you solve some math problems quickly. So let's talk about what a fraction is. A fraction, typically written like this, something over something else, A over B, is used to display a number or quantity which is not a whole. So more precisely, a fraction represents the number of parts A, which is the top, of the total number of equal parts that comprise the whole, which is B, the bottom. So the total number of equal parts that comprise the whole is always the bottom. So again, the number above the line A is called the numerator, and the number below the line B is called the denominator. So some examples of that might be 2/3, or 1/4, or 17/12, or 64/100ths, things like that. Those are examples of fractions. The top numbers, 2, 1, 17, 64, those are your numerators, and then the bottom numbers are your denominators. Now with decimals, a decimal number, or simply just called a decimal, is written in that format: a number, n, point, another number, r, and that is a decimal. So it is a number that uses a decimal point followed by digits that show a smaller value than 1. So it's less than 1, this r part, this decimal part. The numbers to the left of the decimal point represent the whole, and the number of numbers to the right of the decimal point represent the fraction. So for example, some examples of decimals might be 3.2, or 4.715, or 2.3 repeating. So those are some examples of decimals. The number before the point is your whole, and then the number after is telling you what portion of a whole we have in addition to the 4 or 3 or 2 or whatever your whole is. So that purple part here tells us the fraction or the portion in addition to our whole number before the decimal point. Now you could also have a decimal that has a 0 before the decimal point, something like this maybe, or some decimal that has a 0 in front of the decimal point. So this means it's less than 1. It doesn't even have a whole. It's just the fraction or the decimal portion. So we are going to start with how we simplify fractions. So if the numerator and the denominator of a fraction can each be divided by the same number, which we call a common divisor, then the fraction can be simplified by dividing both the numerator and the denominator, so the top and the bottom, by that common divisor in order to create a simpler fraction to work with. So consider the fraction A over B, capital A over capital B, where capital A is some number times C. Capital B on the bottom is represented by some number times C as well, meaning that C is a common factor of each A and B. So it is a common number that can be divided into A and B. So in letters, we can see we have two options in terms of how we can simplify fractions, two methods that are very, very similar, but maybe you think about them slightly differently. So I'm going to jump to the numbers, but there are the letters here written out for you in case you want to see it that way, but sometimes it helps to see it with a number example. So 3 over 12, if I were to simplify 3 over 12, method 1 would think of multiplying or rewriting that top number as multiplication. So for example, 3 can be rewritten as 1 times 3. And then thinking, can that bottom number also be rewritten using the multiple of 3? So 12 can be rewritten as 4 times 3. And so we can look at this 3 on top and 3 on bottom as simplifying to 1. And so we are left with this 1 over 4. And so 1/4 would be the simplified fraction for 3/12. Another way to think about that using 3/12 is what can I divide this top number and this bottom number by? The same number on top and on bottom. So again, that's the common divisor. And if I can divide both of those by the same number, then this fraction can be simplified. So for example, here we can divide by 3 on top and on bottom and get a whole number in both of those places. So 3 divided by 3 becomes 1, and 12 divided by 3 becomes 4. And because we're dividing on top and on bottom by the same exact number, then this mathematically stays the same value of the fraction. It's just changing what it looks like. So 3/12 of a pizza, for example, is the same amount as 1/4 of a pizza. It's just 1/4 is considered the simplified version of 3/12. So let's take a look at these two examples here. Simplify the following fractions. So we have 6 over 27 and we have 12 over 32. So let's start with 6 over 27. With 6 over 27, again, you can think about rewriting 6 and rewriting 27 as something times something, where you have a repeated multiple or repeated number on top and bottom. Or you can think about, what can I divide the top and the bottom by? The same number with 6 and 27. So if you think about it, 6 and 27, those are not both even. So 2 won't work. If I go to 3, let's try 3 and see what happens. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. That is a whole number. 27 divided by 3 is 9. That is a whole number as well. So that did work. And if you look at 2 over 9, there is nothing we can divide 2 and 9 by other than the number 1. No whole numbers or no natural numbers. Other than the number 1, so 2/9 is simplified all the way. If you wanted to use the other method, you could do 2 times 3, rewrite 6 as 2 times 3, and rewrite 27 as 3 times 9, or 9 times 3. And the 3 on top and bottom cancel out or simplify, and that 2 over 9 is what's left. So either way works. With this one over here, 12 over 32, there's a couple ways we can look at this one. So again, we can think of, what can I divide the top and the bottom by? Same number on both. And if you see and know your factors of numbers, then you will see that 4 is actually the largest number we can divide each of these by. And if we do that, 12 divided by 4 comes out to be 3 on top. 32 divided by 4 on bottom is 8. So 3/8 would be our answer. And 3 and 8, again, cannot be divided by anything other than 1 in both places, where it's the same factor being divided on top and on bottom. 1 is the only number that both of these can be divided by in terms of sharing a factor. So 3/8 is fully simplified in that fraction form. Now, another option would be the same method, but a slightly different approach. So let's say you forgot about 4. You can look at this and see that these are even and go to dividing by 2. And if I divide by 2 on top and bottom, 12 divided by 2 is 6. 32 divided by 2 is 16. Now you'll notice that these are still even. So we can actually go again, because if they're both even, that means they are both divisible by 2. So we can divide the top and the bottom again by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 16 divided by 2 is 8. And so now we have two numbers that are not both even. They're not both divisible by anything other than 1. So 3/8, again, would be what we get, even if we use that method where we take a couple steps. And then finally, the other method altogether would be rewriting 12 and 32. So for example, 12 I could rewrite as 3 times 4 on top. On bottom, I could rewrite 4 times 8 for 32. And then I could simplify or cross cancel the 4's on top and bottom and just have 3 over 8 left as my fraction. So either way, we get 3/8 as our answer when we simplify our fraction for 12 over 32. So in summary, a fraction is written as A over B, and A, remember, is the part and B is the whole. A decimal, our whole is our N in front of the decimal point, and then our R is our portion or fraction. And then simplifying fractions, we want to find that common factor, that common number that can be divided into the numerator and the denominator. Divide in both of those places. That will give you a simplified fraction, and just double check that you can't continue to divide so that you know it is fully simplified.